Hi everyone, and welcome to Raisina Mediterranean podcast. I'm Selma Barçanin, founder of quantum growth agency So. I'll be guiding you today on a very, very interesting conversation that feels more relevant than ever. Profits or passports, the new rules for global businesses. Geopolitics isn't just about diplomats anymore. Founders, investors, different creators now have to think about export bans, about local policies, and supply chains when building or scaling different businesses. Everything from where we invest to who we partner with is being retaught. And that's exactly what we need to unpack today. I'm really excited to share my brain today with two amazing minds. Maggie Sprenger, general partner at Audere with deep experience in venture capital and early stage innovation. Also, Andrew Hawley, co-founder of Ghost Dynamics, working across strategy, brand, and digital transformation throughout the Indo-Pacific. Maggie, Andrew, before we dive in, I want to start with something a little bit personal. What's one shift in how you do business today that would have felt impossible or unlikely 5 years ago? Maggie, should we start with you?
So that's a great question, and it's very pertinent to what we're talking about today. I would say that, 5 years ago or even further, I really felt that the strongest technology was what was going to be positioned to win. But given the shifts in geopolitics, shifts in alignments and tensions, I think that companies that succeed today are the ones that are very much in control of their narrative, their strategy, and their relationships internationally.
Thank you. And Andrew, from what you've seen across Asia Pacific, how are your companies adjusting their global growth strategies?
Well, firstly, I think how they're adjusting their strategies probably depends on their country of origin, I suppose. Certainly for us, we're looking further afield than Singapore and Australia from a New Zealand point of view, looking out towards the UAE, GCC, and India. I think everyone's fairly clear-eyed about the sort of dissolution of the steady state of the world as it has been for many years, and so because of that, everyone's hedging who they're talking to and making sure they're having multiple conversations concurrently, not knowing where things will actually be defined over the next sort of year or two or 5 years, as we sort of move through this dynamic change. For some of the companies that we deal with, because of the geopolitical changes, outsourcing is a big factor. So, moving some of what they do to other sources as well, just to make sure that they can supply demand if things become even more dynamic. And then I think probably the last one for me, even though I could probably talk for a long time on it, would have to be that, considering the sort of geotechnic changes that are affecting all of us, that gap between conceptualizing a product, taking it to market, and then validating in between is now sort of done simultaneously. So I think before you used to have a fairly good view of what to expect and how to design an answer for a specific market, but with all those changes, it's an iterative process that you need to sort of go through on a daily basis. So that requires a big mind shift for companies and organizations, especially coming from a smaller market across the Asia Pacific, to be able to kind of integrate that in your process workflow in parallel.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very, very insightful. Maggie, the founders you work with are dealing with a lot of unpredictable situations. Are they actually managing to de-risk and still stay fast and focused on innovation? And what does that balance look like in practice from your point of view?
Yeah, I think inherent in being a startup is the requirement that you have a certain amount of nimbleness. You're not just bringing in technology to exist in the world, but you're also structuring a business, a strategy, that narrative. And how do you think about doing that thoughtfully and tactfully? The best companies that we work with see these challenges as an opportunity, right? They lean into it. They're looking at a way to have a forcing function about what they should be prioritizing. I would say the ones that we see struggle are the ones that see these additional constraints or challenges as something really prohibitive. I think it's actually a great time to be a startup because we're living in a world that requires nimbleness and requires very fast iteration. And if you are a huge company, that's very challenging. Or if there's a layer of bureaucracy that you have to manage to meet a challenge, then that adds additional complexity. So we see a lot of startups really thriving right now as a certain level of chaos is being introduced into the ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. I can resonate with that because I'm running a startup. Andrew, you worked with business scaling from smaller markets into the global scene. Is that getting actually harder or just different in the new landscape?
I think, different, not necessarily harder. I mean, it's always sort of challenging, I suppose. Some of what you said before, Maggie, completely resonates and I think probably applies to answering, that question. Firstly, I'd say that, good ideas, good solutions and good products, if they're well thought through and validated, they always resonate, for one. Going to market from a small market is always going to be expensive, and that hasn't really changed. But I think the thing for me, which is kind of what you were touching on as well, like in a really volatile, shifting, dynamic kind of environment, it presents enormous opportunity on a daily basis for new players, and it also presents risk for established players. So actually, aside from the heat in the environment, or the potential heat in the sort of global environment, so long as that can stay lukewarm, it's actually a very fertile environment, even more so for organisations from smaller markets. Because I think in the past, when you had a rate of change or shift, there was still like this sort of perception that if you did come from a smaller market, did you have the credibility, the authenticity, the ability to scale, to perform in those markets? But actually now we've seen world-changing ideas come from all different corners of the globe, and they've had a massive impact on the way people live their lives, how you secure nations, how you do business together, how you trade. So I think everyone around the world accepts that ideas can come from anywhere. They don't presuppose the kind of capability you have. And so right now it's an incredibly level playing field. And so, again, I just say that so long as the heat can stay at a tepid temperature, it's super exciting. And then, anyone can come up with the next unicorn. And if you're already an established player with a legacy reputation, systems, a behemoth, if you like, sometimes that's fine. But in many categories, it can be your Achilles heel. And I guess there's people that are sort of in between those two on a spectrum as well. But I think I agree with you in that actually now is the best time ever. If you're someone who's passionate and driven and can see a gap and go for it, chances are that the time's never been better. And there's certainly capital around to support those ideas if they're validated.
Told you here are with me brilliant minds, and I will for sure feel so empowered after this. But I have to put government into our conversation. So governments are making bold moves with industrial policy and funding. Are startups really able to benefit from that, or is it just a thing for big players?
I think they are benefiting. You were just saying if we can keep the temperature tepid, and we're not. And to the point I made earlier, it's hard for big corporations and it's hard for democracies generally to move very, very quickly. And so I think what we're seeing broadly is, again, both a huge opportunity for startups. I think it's a huge opportunity for collaborations like what we're talking about here at the Raisina Dialogue. What does it look like for IMEC? What does it look like for public-private partnerships? How do we think much more specifically about how to leverage the capabilities as we are navigating some very thorny landscapes and situations? Policy around, say, China was meant to be a deterrent. And what we've largely seen is that while it temporarily slowed things, it really drove a fierce independence and a decoupling from a number of supply chains, and international relationships have been in place for a long time. And so given that, how do we navigate it thoughtfully? It's going to be something that I think is going to belong largely to the people who can move quickly.
Yeah. And Andrew, I was wondering, where does corporate venture capital fit into all of this? Is it really helping startups get closer to public innovation and also open up some infrastructure opportunities? And also back to de-risking, I'll tap on that. Do you think it's actually possible to reduce the risk in this interconnected world without losing your edge, especially from the consumer perception point of view?
What you were just saying before, Maggie, around just some of the challenges with engaging government funds is very, very real. And I can think of a number of examples where startups or even existing players who have new products have actually forged relationships with corporate venture capital. One of the advantages in that is that you end up truncating the development path or the ability to kind of put it into a real operating environment. Not only that, as a kind of startup, you then get to leverage the enormous amounts of data, insights, specialist expertise, which generally speaking, if you're a startup, you can't afford. So you get the skills, capability, knowledge, and expertise in the right partnership. You also get the market that you're going with. And the cost of doing that alone is massive. In fact, maybe it's the same cost as developing the thing you were creating in the first place. And then another one for me also is that you get those two things as well, but depending on who you partner with, the corporate venture capital fund and their parent company, if you like, obviously comes with its own credibility, its own networks within its own sector, but then also adjacent sectors. So if you had a startup and you got support from a corporate venture capital fund, not only, assuming you're in the same sector, obviously, can you take your product to its existing kind of customers, potentially competitors, but, if the organization's big enough, they come with, where I'm from, this concept of mana. And so if you can, develop a product and a service that they accept as being, quality and performance-driven and regulatory compliant, then it does reduce barriers for engaging other sectors and it gives an enormous amount of credibility. Those small funds as well do also come with other capability to help accelerate up product development as well. So I think we're seeing anyway that is like a really positive, exciting kind of angle, especially if, sometimes when trying to engage government funds, it can become protracted.
From minute to minute, I'm becoming more and more positive. So we have to easily wrap up to our conversation today. And if you had one piece of advice to a founder or investor trying to stay future ready in today's world, what would actually be? This is questions for both of you.
I would say don't wait to go global. You don't have that time frame anymore. To your point, great ideas exist everywhere. And if a founder is going to go pursue the TAM available, there has to be a strategy for international expansion from day one.
I'd just build on that really that in the past you used to think of ideas, not necessarily by design, but by accident, in a local context. But I think right now, even if it is for a local context, you have to be aware of the global context for the thing to actually work. There's no way you could be thinking of anything without having at least a cursory glance at all the issues that are unfolding on a daily basis. I feel having a global lens and paying attention to what's happening, even if your product or service seems somewhat adjacent or removed from that, there's no way anything is untouched by some of the things that are impacting the world on a daily basis right now.
Perfect. Maggie, Andrew, thank you so much. This was absolutely brilliant, very energizing and very smart conversation. And to everyone listening today, whether you are chasing growth or navigating change, the future of global business will actually demand from us to stay flexible, to stay informed, and a little bit more brave. I'm Selma Bachanin. Thanks for staying with us and keep building with intention. Have a good day.